Line's good.
Never on.
Whoa.
Hard. Hardly.
Come on, Brent.
Line's good.
Got real close.
The hair high, right?
Try and hit 2/3.
Have they saved it for her? Yes, they have.
Welcome to Game of Stones, everybody. I am Sean Graham, Scott alongside, as always. Hello, Scott.
Sean, it's curling season. Been waiting all summer for this.
Have you? You've just been sitting around looking at the clock, being like, it's almost time.
Yeah, I have. I've been sitting here in this room, with the air conditioner blowing on my head, just waiting for curling to start.
Yeah, I have a theory that based on the amount of salt that the city of Ottawa puts down around city buildings, that it's somebody's job just to put salt down, and they wait all summer in their office, just looking at the forecast, depressed when it's warm. And then as soon as it gets to 6 degrees, they go out and just dump all the salt that they can. They're so excited. And then they get to February and they're like, oh my God, we have no salt left. What happened to all of our salt? And it's like, well, you put it all down in October. But yeah, we're looking forward to this curling season as we start to turn the page to action going on. A lot of events going on around the world. We had the event in Scotland at their performance center. A lot of the European teams competing in that this past weekend. We had the first of the two Oakville events took place this past weekend. We have another one coming up this weekend as a lot of the teams from Central and Eastern Canada, the top teams, are in Oakville for those two events. We also have some events out west. Some teams are heading, I believe, to Edmonton to get their legs under them. Those early September get your legs spiels are going on across the country. Very exciting as we look ahead to the pre-trials and the pre-trials, which will be taking place in Ottawa later this month. And we hopefully will be there. Curling Canada did announce that media will be allowed. So hopefully we'll be able to get into the building, cover those events a little bit, give you a sense of what's going on those two events as they take place, as teams try to get those entries into the trials and into the pre-trials in October. And with that, Curling Canada did announce that they are going to stream 3 draws a day from the Ottawa events. And it means that with curling coming back in broadcast form, it made me think about something that was on my mind, certainly during the bubble, and it's come up a little bit on the show. The idea of players as characters, where what we see on TV isn't representative of the player as a human being. It's their character, their curling character that they have. And what we see a lot of is people who are critical of players, not for their play, but for their personalities. And my theory here is that that's not fair, because their personalities on the ice is very different than who they are as a person. So we should think of them as characters. So Scott, that's my hypothesis on how we should view players who are on TV, that we're not viewing the person, we're viewing this character of who they are while they curl. What do you think of that hypothesis?
Well, that makes a ton of sense, Sean. It's like any portion of TV, like for example, reality TV or other sports. You're only seeing a really, really small slice of this person. We think of it in curling as more than other sports because they're mic'd up. You have close-up shots of the face. TSN lists their occupation when they come out, so they feel a little more like us, so it's easier to identify.
Mm-hmm.
But you're in maybe the highest pressure situation you've been in your life. If you're super competitive and you're really invested in the outcome of the game, it's going to break through sometimes where slam your broom, maybe a bit of a curse, and that shouldn't be what the public thinks of you in your worst moment or in your best moment. We're somewhere in between. So yeah, I think having the players that we see on TV, thinking that you can get a full picture of who they are as people from that is pretty foolhardy.
Yeah, so that's sort of how we approach it and how we think of it. And I think that's how we try to talk about players when we are talking about them on the show. We're talking about, say, communication, what we hear on the mics, and what we see when we're in person, and trying to almost play body language doctor at times,
Hmm.
and trying to assess the relationships. And there is very much a difference between who we see on camera and who we don't. But that's our opinion. And Scott, I don't know. Between the two of us, I believe we've played 0 TV games.
Between us and our guest, many, many more.
Yeah, between us and our guest this week, we've played probably, I don't know, 50 TV games and have a couple Briar medals.
Yeah, and we have none, so it'll forget what our guest has done.
Yeah, so we reached out to Kirk Muyres to talk about this from a player's perspective and how aware players are of the mics and the cameras, how long it takes to adjust to that, and what players think of that fans see when they're out on the ice playing these TV games. So Kirk was nice enough to join us. If you would rather watch it, it is available on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Game of Stones pod. You can head there and you can watch the video of the chat that we had with Kirk. So it's available there. Or if you'd rather listen to it, stick with us right now, because here is our chat with Kirk Muyres. All right, and Kirk Muyres joins us now out from Saskatchewan. Kirk, how you doing today?
Pretty good. We still got a little summer left in us in Regina here, so hopefully it holds on for a few more days.
Yeah, I remember one Labor Day weekend when I was in Regina, someone said it's snowing in Edmonton and it's coming this way, and the whole place just got very depressing.
Oh, it is. And I never realized, you never realize the seasonal depression until spring comes around. And then when spring comes around, you're like, oh, this is so good, but you don't realize it until then. So as long as we can hold on, for a couple more weeks, we're okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was even more for you this year after you spent all that time in the bubble, to get out as spring is starting, like a double whammy of freedom and spring.
Yeah, well, yeah, totally, it was. And I must say, I remember in Calgary too, like it was nice there. So we'd sit on our balcony or go for a walk around the complex and that sort of thing. So I remember like, I guess the seasonal depression was wearing off at that point already in the bubble. So,
well, we're really excited for you to join us to talk about this. As we said on the intro, there's this idea of what we think of players based on what we see on TV, and the majority of the curling fandom know players from TV, and it's the most intimate of television sports because you guys are mic'd up, but at the same time, it's you guys in a competitive setting for the most part. I mean, there's the occasional events where we see where it's pretty light and loose, but at the top of your game, especially at a Briar World Championships, and this year in November at the trials, this is as intense as it gets for you guys. So we can see some things that might not always reflect the best on the players because of that. But before we get into some of the specifics, I'm just curious, do you guys ever go back and watch your TV games? Outside of potentially watching for strategic things or just the way normal athletes watch tape, do you ever go back and watch them just for fun?
I don't think many players do. Like, I know I find myself like once in a while I will, but it's weirdly awkward listening to yourself, I find, or watching yourself. So I kind of stay away from it a little bit. But we do watch kind of, call it game film. So we'd go back, watch an end here or there, or watch a game, or even watch other teams and see what they're doing and that sort of thing. So there is a lot of that goes on. Myself, like I'm a huge curling fan. Like I love watching curling on TV. So like to go and watch other teams play and that sort of thing, great. It's just I find that like if it's not live and in the moment, so going back and watching one of our games is just for fun, doesn't hold a lot of excitement. Right. But we do it to get better, I guess you could say. So,
well, is there any benefit to being the TV game from the film perspective that you can, if you wanted to, go back and hear the communication more clearly than you could if you're recording from the end? That I know a lot of teams do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's absolutely that pieces. If you're the TV game, you got 4 players that are mic'd up. You can generally go and hear the good communication. What we find is a lot of our important communication is actually between shots. So when the other team's playing, when our mics are off, there's a lot of good communication in there that we don't get by watching on TV. And then as we play the shot, there's the communication. That's what you hear at home. A lot of the little things that we continue to work on is kind of in between shots and how we're communicating, like what had just happened, what's going to happen, those sort of things. So it kind of gets lost, obviously, when you're watching it on TV. But those are like the little pieces that you kind of are starting to put together more and more, it seems, in the last couple of years.
Well, how much would you say that the people at home hear of a game, of your guys' communication? Like, could you put it like under 50%? I would assume.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, and I mean, there's also the bias towards the back end where like some games when we're playing, the front end doesn't even have mics, and so like there'd be a bias just to make sure when the back end's talking that you don't hear a lot of the front end, and then 50-50 whether you're throwing the shot or the other team's throwing the shot is when your mics are on or off. So if you're gonna slip out a swear, do it when the other team's throwing, but that's not usually when the emotions run high. So that's why everyone hears the swears on TV, because it's right after your shot, your mic's still on, and then you let it slip.
Yeah, well, we talked to Andrew Stokely last year, who does sound for the slams, and he talked about that, like not wanting to embarrass players by allowing that stuff to get out, or in between ends, making sure mics are off and you don't get too many hot mic moments. Although we had some great ones in the bubble. Laura Walker, I think, had a couple of the best ones after shots during the Scotties. So it's fun to hear those. But would you say that what is presented to fans, like how accurate is it of the people, right? I said this before we started to record. The idea for this is based partly off of your team, and even a guy like Steve Laycock, I mentioned, very quiet on the ice, but everyone seems to like him. Everyone says good things about him, but he doesn't necessarily pop as a TV personality. So, how accurate of a sense do you think you can get of a player from TV when you're sitting at home and watching?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't, I would say generally speaking, I don't think you get a really good sense of it. It's like curling, like you said, is so intimate that we can like hear you talk. We can like start develop your personality in our mind, but that's that like persona you see on TV. Plus you're only seeing 50% of that communication. And it's almost like when you have a celebrity and you see him on TV and you see him in the media, you think you know this person, but you really don't, because you're just seeing this persona that you see on TV that's being portrayed to you. Excuse me. It's being portrayed to you by, first of all, the producers. And then second of all, it's these athletes in the absolutely heat of the moment, how they're kind of going about their business. And, you see it a lot, I think with women's teams. It's like, well, that woman isn't a very nice person. Well, she's just competitive. She's a great person. And just because she's competitive, is for some reason the masses think that she's not a nice person. And I find that, especially on the women's side, it just blows my mind that's still how people perceive that. And then on the men's side, it's okay when a man is angry or in the zone, but for a woman that's not okay. And I think that's something that really needs to change kind of moving forward. But I don't think you actually get a true sense of the person by watching them on TV.
Yeah, I think we call that Jennifer Jones syndrome, actually. The competitive woman who's criticized for being competitive. Yeah.
It blows my mind. It's unbelievable in my opinion, but it is. She's the GOAT. She's the best ever. She's competitive. She's focused, and then people draw conclusions based on that. And I mean, I don't know Jennifer well, but I've met her a few times and obviously talked to her over the years. She's one of the most amazing people you're ever going to meet, and so it just doesn't portray that way on TV, and people draw their conclusions unfairly.
So Kirk, I wonder how much does the team think of how they're being portrayed when they're in the moment, or is there just you're in the zone, you're playing? How much does that cross your mind?
I don't think it's a ton. We don't talk about it as a group. Like our thought process is when you go, you put yourself in the place that you need to be to compete your best, and whatever that looks like from the outside in, that's just what it's going to be. And I think the other side of it too is to have people draw these conclusions and have their opinions, and like have the people they like to cheer for and they don't like to cheer for. Like that's just good for the game. It's good for the game that people are drawing these weird conclusions about players, because then it creates that interest and it creates people cheering against or for a player. So I think all in all, that is actually good for the game. There's just this element of generally curlers aren't professionals, so we're not going home to our $1 million paycheck. So it's a little tougher to take some of that criticism when you aren't necessarily being compensated like a golfer or an MLB player or whatever that may be.
Right.
Yeah, and we certainly saw that last year during the Worlds, both on the men's and the women's sides. That with everything that was at stake last year, and obviously Carrie Anderson and their team struggled early in the week there, and there was a lot of criticism on them. And I think there was something with Jim Bender with Botcher's team, and they ended up going back and forth on that. And that's the sort of stuff that you don't really like to see when you're a fan. But it also brings me to the question, Kirk, with everything going on with social media and so many teams being proactive on social media, that sponsors obviously like it, that you're out there, you're putting this forward, but it does lead to this interaction that you have to have with fans at some level. So how much does the perception of the team feed into what you're doing on social media, or do you farm it out and have other people do it during events so you don't have to look at that and you can just keep all that noise out of the team?
Yeah, and that's been a transition over the last few years. I think with a lot of teams is there's this element of teams are like these professional entities that don't, and again, going back to the money, don't make professional money, but still need to train like a Olympic athlete or professional athlete, but then also go to work and have families, and we all know that whole story. So it's really transitioned into some getting people to help with some of that stuff, like you said, farming it out. So we've been doing that the last couple of years, farming it out during events, so we don't have to play a game, run off the ice, get on social media to post those sort of things, so we can kind of lay back. But at the same time, we're still very engaged in it. So we're still, maybe not so much during the event, but between events, before events, we're still engaged in that social media. Because like you said, it's part of, life now, but it's also very much a part of any athlete being in that social media, being interactive with fans. It's very important to kind of keep that going. So we still do it, but we do farm it out. And we do have someone that helps us during events so we can focus on just playing.
And I'm wondering, you mentioned earlier that when you're out on say you're the TV game, you guys try not to focus on it. Don't pay attention. You're just there to play. How long does it take you, or did it take you personally, to be able to get to that point? Because I would imagine the first time you're out there with cameras on you, it's hard to ignore. So how long did it take for you to get to that point, to forget that you're mic'd, to forget that the cameras are there?
Yeah, no, that's I think it's always kind of a work in progress. And I remember for sure the first few games, I found it was tougher to get used to lots of people in the building, because you have these people's eyes on you and you can connect with them. You could look at them, look them in the eyes, and they're there. Whereas like the camera's just kind of there. It's just kind of this not real thing, right? You don't see the people on the other side of that. So I found that easier to deal with, the cameras, than saying playing in an arena with 15,000 people. And so that took a lot more for me to kind of get through. And I would say it took, we won the bronze at the Brier in 2015. And I remember the semifinal of that event, I played terrible. Looking back on that, that was because I was so worried about the people in the crowd. And it took me a little while to realize that. And then so I kind of, worked on that over the last, the next 4 or 5 years. And now it's not such a big issue, but it's still definitely something I remind myself of going into those games. There's going to be a big crowd. It's going to have a mic. There's going to be cameras in my face, whatever that may be. Once you recognize it, you move past it, it becomes easier. But it's definitely something that you have to be aware of, and then just kind of move forward. But it probably took me 2 or 3 years of being on TV and in the big crowds to realize what was happening in those moments.
And then this year, you're going to have the transition back to crowds after what last year was, where you had cutouts in the crowd and maybe some people who weren't playing that draw in the building. So that'll be, I'm sure, a transition to get used to it again. So it's good that I assume you guys are looking forward to the Grand Slams, not only for the playing in the slams, but also for that experience, get people back in the building in advance of the trials, which is going to be a pretty lively atmosphere, I'm imagining.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there's also this other element of playing in front of a crowd, is dealing with the crowd noise. So like if Jennifer Jones makes a huge shot on the sheet next to you and you're getting ready to throw, and all of a sudden 10,000 people start to erupt, how are you going to deal with that? Like, are you going to throw? If you're halfway through a shot and you're halfway down the ice, and you're trying to communicate, now you're into hand signals. So all those things are good to get back into, something we didn't have to deal with in the bubble, which was, in hindsight, kind of nice. But at the same time, like, there's nothing better than when, like, when you're in any arena and the arena erupts. It's unreal, much less when you're playing on that ice. Like, it's so cool.
Yeah, because there were some shots this year that would have really brought the house down. You had obviously what Wayne Maddaw was doing all week.
Yeah.
Was crazy. I hate to bring it up, but the shot you guys lost on in the semis, that would have been a pretty
Thanks
loud
for bringing
roar.
that up. Well, I got to go, guys. This is the end of the interview.
But they're like, and what Matt can do at the end of games too, the big high hard ones that he can throw. There were some moments there, and they mentioned it on the broadcast frequently. Like, could you imagine if there were people here? The place would just be hopping. But it does lead me a little bit then to your team, Kirk, that you have. I think it's quite interesting to see who you play with perception wise in the fan base, because I think Laura Walker is pretty universally loved in the fan base. Like, you don't really see any Laura Walker hate online, but you do see it a little bit occasionally with Matt. But I think Moss gets most of what I've seen. But can you just explain to me or to the people out there, like, how different are these people from what we might see on TV?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, again, everyone has their persona on TV, but it's not necessarily the persona on TV. It's just when they're competing, they have these personas. And like, whether it's Matty last year at the Briar, he got in trouble because he slammed his broom and the head popped off. Well, anybody that curls know that, like, those heads just kind of fly off sometime when the pressure bursts up. So it wasn't crazy, but then there's that perception that he's a hothead and a crazy guy and this sort of thing. And it's like, well, actually, you have a 25-year-old kid who's on the way to be one of the best curlers ever to live, who's dedicated his life to this, and is very competitive. And that's the only way he can get good, is if you're very competitive. Otherwise, you wouldn't put yourself through the turmoil that you put yourself through to get to that level. And then he has a moment where he's frustrated with himself, shows a little frustration, and now the masses go, oh, this guy, he's out of control. Well, if you guys have ever met Matty or Mosk or whatever that may be, these guys are salt of the earth. Like, they're good time Charlies, great people, care for their friends and family. Like, you wouldn't believe, like, welcomed me into this team, like, unlike anything else you've ever experienced, has great love for their family and friends. But then in that moment, when they're really, everything they've worked for their whole life has a little tough moment, and then shows a little frustration, then everyone's painted this picture with them. And I think it's completely unfair. But that being said, we got my dog joining us.
All right, special
that
guest.
being said, yeah, exactly. Completely unfair. But at the same time, like, I love the fact that we have fans that actually care enough to get mad. And if we could have millions of fans that care enough to get mad at good or bad or otherwise, I mean, then the sport would grow to just incredible levels. So there's kind of the both elements that you kind of got to accept that you're going to have fans and people that don't like you, and that's life. And no matter how you go about it, you're going to have that. Oh, now I got my girlfriend joining me too.
Hi.
So,
anyways.
Kirk, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is when you're on the ice, you're so positive with everything. And how much of that is intentional and how much of that is just you being a bright side kind of guy?
Well, and that's a really good point. And you know what, for that, I very so there's two things I want to kind of talk about there. I very intentionally try to be positive, and I don't know when that really started, but I remember a couple of years ago, maybe hearing Mark Kennedy saying that, like, you kind of need that positive person on the team. He decided he was going to be that positive person, and I think I've been doing it, for a good 10, 15 years into juniors. I was always trying to be that positive person, but the goal has always been, and I think this was kind of drilled into me by my parents and maybe my dad over the years, is like, what can you do to make your teammates better? And like, I've always thought, like, my teammates are always better when I make them feel like they can make mistakes, like it's going to be okay, like I'm going to have their back. That makes them play better. So I very intentionally decided that was how I was going to, play the game. And I always consider myself, I'm like, well, I'm not actually the best curler, I'm not the best athlete, but if I can do things to make my teammates better, that'll just help us be a better team. So I very intentionally implemented that. And then on the other side of that is, trust me, there's people on social media that don't like that either. So you can be frustrated and you can show emotion and people don't like you because you do that. You can be this positive energy out there and people don't like you for that. So there's no winning. There's going to be people that have their opinion. And if you can just move on from it and be like, I'm going to be who I need to be for my team, and this is who I need to be, and I need to be that positive voice for the team. I need to continue to keep us moving along. And then other players are going to be that way. And I can tell you, playing with Mosk now for a year, he is incredibly positive on our team.
Mhm.
People don't see it, and people maybe have their opinions, but he is an incredibly positive influence on our team. He's a leader out there. No matter what, he's always bringing the team along. He's always pulling us along. He's always keeping us going and very positive. And people may not see that. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But that's just the thing. People create their narrative about someone in their mind, but it's really not real in a lot of cases. And then third point on that is I'm really not that positive in real life. You can just ask my partner who came in here. I've seen a few like tweets or something over the years. It's like, oh, Kirk's partner must be so lucky that he's positive like this. And I'm like, I don't think if you asked her that, I'm not always positive like that. But it's a part of my curling game that I've really tried to implement, and then try to carry it over into my life. But it doesn't always happen that way.
Of course.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is the way people see it is what they want in teammates when they play. Because so many fans play themselves in rec leagues, and you look on TV for who maybe you would want to play with. And I know for what I like to play with, and I said this after again, to bring up that that semifinal of the Brier, I said on the show after, but I said that was the best game I've ever seen Muscowie play for what I like in someone who's going to be the third. I was so impressed that day. And, I therefore put very high expectations on you guys for this season as a result of that. But like, it's one of those things where for me in one game, I don't know if it fully changed my opinion, but I thought that was a great game. And I have no idea what he shot. If he missed anything, I have no idea. But just on what I heard on the mic, I was so positive about it. And I think seeing that from you guys, it takes time, right, to come together, to figure out how to communicate. I mean, you played with your brother forever, right? And that's a different type of communication than when it's not someone who you grew up with and have played with for a long time. So just how long does that take, and how challenging is it to learn communication with new players when you're doing it on national television?
Yeah, I think it's a forever work in progress. Like, I think almost at the stage that we play at, at the top level, like pretty much everybody's making 90% of their shots generally. But it's like those other things, and it's that communication piece. And so like we got thrown in the ringer there. Basically, our first game we ever played was like together was, I think it was against Ontario at the Brier, and that was on TV. Like, and so you kind of work through it, and like we kind of started to feel the groove. Luckily, we've all played together in the past at some point, so and we've all been kind of friends over the years, so we kind of know each other. But we got thrown in the ringer. We continue to like fine tune that communication piece, and Adam Kingsbury is a huge help in that. But I think that's going to continue on as we go here. And I think the other thing was like we had to find our identity. What roles are each person going to play on the team? Who's going to be that leader in this moment, that moment? And you kind of have to figure that out as you go. And I think it's a forever work in progress. But like you said, we were thrown in the fire there at the bubble. We learned it really good. We had in my opinion, we had a great season for coming together, and that just what that was. And then it was like, now we've kind of worked throughout the summer on kind of fine tuning our roles and that communication piece. And then that'll flow into when we get going here this season as well. And so it's just a never ending progression, but I think we fell into it really good. And I think we have a good mix of personalities, and everyone can kind of know their spot. And then we talk about that, after the game. It's like, hey, do you like when I do this? Do you like when I do that? Love it, hate it, whatever it may be. And I think that progression is the small things, I think, that's going to lead like the next team to be champions in our sport.
So I guess just to wrap here, I've thought for the last couple of years, and we've sort of touched on the show in pieces, where I want to start referring to what we see on TV and the players as we see them on TV as, you've used the word persona, I've used the word character, that this is sort of the TV character of the person as a way to differentiate between the human being, say Kirk Muyres, and the TV athlete Kirk Muyres. Would you think that's fair? And how do you think we could maybe best communicate to fans who, again, we love that they're invested and we love that they care about how they feel about the players, but we also want to make it an environment where you guys can go play, do your thing, and you don't have to come back and look at just awfulness online, right? And you can really engage with the fans in a positive, meaningful way.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good, like, it's like you have your TV character and people have, and then whatever that may be. And I don't know the answer really, how to like differentiate that. But I mean, maybe teams like our team need to do a better job of like off ice content for people to see, whether that's what we do in our normal day-to-day life, what we do with our family and friends and those sort of things. Maybe there's that piece that needs to be implemented. I don't know how the best way to do that is. And at the same, this kind of off the question, but at the same time, it's like, how lucky are we that we found we play sport, and whoever figured it out, that we can have like the mics on us, the cameras on our faces. Like, that's what makes this game so special. Like, people are like part of it, and they think they're part of the team. You don't get that in other sports. I know other sports are actually trying to do that, like with the CFL, they got their mic'd up games and that sort of thing. But it's just, curling was really ahead of its time in implementing that. And it's probably what made the game so popular on TV. And then it's kind of now, how do we, like you say, differentiate that character you're seeing, have people have their negative opinions about it, and then maybe help people understand who the person behind that character is. I don't know. Maybe the teams need to do a better job of that kind of on social media. But one thing we've seen about social media is, boy, it's hard to weed out the trolls.
Yeah.
That just is never ending, isn't it? It seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, no question. And in that regard too, I mean, Scott and I have been lucky with media access, or Scott's volunteered at some events where you see underneath, right? And even in the mix zone, sometimes it's tough if teams are coming off after tight games. Even if you've won, you can still, like, the blood's still flowing for people. So it's hard to get a true sense of who they are. But it's you just, if you can stand with someone for a couple minutes, you do get a better sense. And I think I've done that with Matt and Mosk with your guys. And in that moment, you can sense that it's a little different from what the TV persona. So having that access, maybe not directly, it's very hard to like talk to every fan in the building, but in some way it's great. And Scott, I don't know, do you want to tell your Kirk Muyres story?
Yeah, well, Kirk, I was volunteering at the trials in 2017, and I think you were the only curler that, shook my hand and said, "Hi, I'm Kirk." And I thought, wow,
there
you go. So I knew that who you were, but that was nice. It was just sort of a nice story that I tell to some people about the experience volunteering, and how fun it can be to be in the building and have that kind of access.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, I appreciate you saying that. And that's another thing I think curlers can do. And I think over the last few years, it's become very intense. It's been harder for curlers to do that, in these moments when all they're thinking about is winning or whatever that may be, and competing. But, that used to be what made curling great, is all the curlers would go to the patch after, and they would hang out with all the fans. Well, that's being lost a little bit in our game. And maybe the curlers need to do a better job of bringing that back, and having those moments and having those handshakes and meeting as many people as you can. But and then you just get a better sense of the person versus the character you see on TV.
Yeah. But again, it's tough when there's such high stakes. Like, I would imagine the trials this year, no one's going to the patch until the teams, like, once you're out of it, maybe for the teams who are out of it. But that's why I think events like the slams are good in that regard. They're still intense, but not quite to the same extent as the trials. Or the Continental Cups are great for that. And having those sorts of lighter events where you can have that interaction because the stakes aren't quite as high, more of those would be great. And I assume, I've never been to the Oakville Spiels, but people rave about them, and you're going there this week to the Oakville Spiel. So I imagine like those sorts of club spiels, you get a lot more interaction.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, again, the average fan that's likely making those negative thoughts on players on TV are not the same fans that are going to the Oakville Spiels or going to the Saskatoon Spiels or going to the Swift Current Spiels, whatever that may be. Those aren't the same fans, which is too bad, because if those fans went to those small clubs where you saw Brad Jacobs and Jennifer Jones walk through the door, change, start getting warmed up right beside the person having a beer and shooting the shit with them. Like, I think those fans would really change their perspective on what they see on TV. It's just unfortunate those fans don't see that, but thank goodness we have those fans that like to watch curling on TV and don't necessarily go to the club, because that's what creates the numbers, right?
Yeah. Well, in that regard, Kirk, you guys are going to have a bunch of TV games this year between the slams and then the trials. We wish you all the best this upcoming season. What is the internal expectations? You guys have one for the year?
We tried to talk about that. It's like, like, obviously we want to go to the Olympics, win the Olympic gold medal. Obviously, we want to win the Brier, win the world championship. I mean, we used to always be like, that's our goal this year. And it's like, okay, well, that's obvious. Everyone knows that's our goal this year. So it's like, we aren't even really worrying about that. Our goal this year is to go out and play consistent curling. Like, whether we can go to the Olympic trials or the Brier, if we can even make the Brier, we can go, even if we make the Olympic trials, like, we can go play our best curling we ever played and not win. That's just the reality of curling at the top level now. So we're not being like, it's either do that or bust. We want to go play consistent curling week in, week out, starting in Oakville next weekend, playing the play-in event, playing the slams, playing the club events, playing whatever it may be. Play consistent. And if we can play consistent, we're going to put ourselves in a lot of big games. The more big games you play, the better you play in big games, and the more success you're going to have. So like, our goal is just consistency all the way through. We're not going to worry about peaking, anything like that. We just want to go play good, solid curling and continue to just get a little better. Let's see where that shakes out at the end of the year. I think that just puts a little more in perspective and a little easier to deal with some of those big events. Because, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a coin flip, but I mean, geez, like I said, the team you think that you go, if on the men's side, if Brendan Botcher plays his best, he may not win. And that's just the way curling is now in our game. So we're not going to put that expectation on ourselves.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and good luck this season. We're looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. So Kirk Muyres,
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate you doing this, guys, and we'll see you around.
All right, there you have it. Our chat with Kirk Muyres. And again, thank him for joining us today. Scott, what did you think of that and what Kirk had to say?
I always love talking to Kirk, Sean. He's a really good representative for his team and the sport in total. And yeah, I agree with a lot of what he had to say, that you can't take too much from what you see on TV. And a lot of interesting stuff about, his role on the team and how the team is trying to, figure out what everyone's role is. So yeah, good stuff from Kirk today.
Yeah, and I think too, the way he talked about communication is something that we could take into our own games as players at the recreational level. That the communication isn't just necessarily during the shot, that there's a lot of communication in between shots and after the game. I thought that was really interesting when he said, when you're playing with new people, particularly, you could talk, what is it that you want from me? What is it that I do that you think is helpful? Or is there things that I'm doing that is not helpful to you? Having that level of communication and being open and honest with each other is key to success. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And too, just thinking about the cameras and potentially having bad games early in your career when you're playing on camera for the first time, and just that awareness. So really great insights from Kirk, and certainly thank him for his time, and wish the best to him and Team Dunstone as they travel to Oakville this week to play in that spiel. And then they will be at the pre-trials here in Ottawa later this month, trying to get that direct entry berth to Saskatoon. So that will do it for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you have not yet, please do subscribe to the show. Wherever did you get your podcast? Do the likes, ratings, comments. Helps us beat the algorithms, helps other people find the show. Got a lot of great stuff upcoming as we get into the curling season, looking ahead to the Olympic trials, not just here in Canada, but around the world. It's going to be a busy fall as we figure out who will be traveling to Beijing. So make sure you subscribe for all of that. And do head on over to gameofstonespod.com, where you can find all of our past episodes, and click on the merch tab. All the proceeds are going to a mix of the Sandra Schmerler Foundation and Food Banks Canada. Scott, we are matching the proceeds, but we also then have to match the proceeds of your order because you put one in this week.
That's right, Sean. With the fall weather coming, feeling a little chill in the air, I thought now's the perfect time for a new Game of Stones hoodie.
Very nice. So we will get that donation in, and keep checking the merch tab. We might have some new things in the works as we get through the season. And of course, we will announce all of that on social media. Do follow along at Game of Stones Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And as I said off the top, if you head on over to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Game of Stones Pod, you can watch the interview that we had with Kirk Muyres. I don't think you'd watch it for Scott or I's face, but maybe Kirk's.
Yeah.
And if you want to see his dog came in the middle. Everyone likes seeing dogs.
Yeah, dogs are good.
Yeah, so check that out over there. So that will do it for this week. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. We will talk to you again next week. But until then, keep those brooms on the ice and don't dump that intern.
Make the final.